Okay, so we're moving on to clouds. I've got the sky. Because of the quality of the paint, I can't quite get the exact blue that I see, but I'm close, and that's gonna be good enough for practice for sure. So with clouds, we really want to get in the habit of experimenting and playing around with different types of brushes and just kind of figuring out which brush is gonna do the job that you need. So if I look at these clouds, they're a puffy type of cloud, so there's gonna be certain brushes that help me with that look. There's wispy clouds sometimes that might require a different brush, but we just have to play around and see what happens. So with that one, I might take my white on my tray, and sometimes I will just find a spot to thin it out, and I'll play with the amount of paint on the brush, and I can make some marks. That's kind of a good puffy mark there. Just a tapping. A lot of students are used to moving a brush this way, and some cloud making will be better that way, but I've got my experimental paper here with the cheap computer paper, and this is a great place. If I was doing wispy clouds, then maybe a different type of stroke would help me, but for those clouds I see there, they're puffy and they're really bright white and intense, so I can play around with how much paint is on the brush, and sometimes loading it on there heavy and using kind of a dot dabbing method. And the blue paint is super dry, so it shouldn't pull up unless I really do a lot of aggressive tapping and swiping. And some parts of the cloud are very, they're not so small of a bump, so I can play around with maybe I see that cloud in the middle there is kind of long, so I can kind of create long, and then I can add, I see that in the middle it's like really thick, so I can play around with making a cloud here. I don't have to make all the clouds, I have to just get happy with and it might take a couple layers of white to intensify it. This down here has a couple layers of sky technique to intensify the colors and bring them out, to smooth them out more and to make them a little more like the image. So these clouds are very super white, and I notice, you notice, and there's some shadow and some dark spots depending on where the sun's at. If the sun is above the clouds, then the bottoms are dark, and sometimes the sun is low and the tops will be dark. So it's not always dark on the bottoms. So I noticed these clouds have kind of a flattishness here, and I can play around with the shadow parts of the cloud. I can go back to my plastic playground here and play around with, it's kind of a bluish tint, but I've got a few drops of black here. I can play around with, so the black is super strong, and I can make a little gray on the side to mix in there. But I'm gonna play around on my playground of color here and try to come up with some colors that work for the bottom of the clouds. Playing around here. I'm gonna test it out on the bottom of this cloud and see if it looks similar. I think it's a little too dark, but I'm gonna try to replicate the way it is there. Sometimes it's a watered down version, so I can go to my water cup and get a lot of water on my brush, and then on my paint tray I can make like a watered down version of the color to add to some of the cloud bottoms. And I feel like that might be a little bit better. Some of the clouds have this puffy area right up in here. I'm looking at this area there, so maybe mixing a little white and playing with how dark that is. Oops, I'm off the camera. I think it's a little more blue than I have it. So I'll go into some straight blue and just kind of play with. I'm on my practice paper, so It's a good place to play around and get comfortable with it. And then once I'm pretty comfortable, I can go over here and make clouds on my good paper. So I'm gonna reset, rinse my brush, get some straight white, and this right there. Start adding in, I see a big cloud here. And there's a little water in the brush that helps the blue kind of make it transparent, which sometimes it needs that. And now I see it gets skinny, and then I see it gets bumpy and thick through here. And then far away, back in the back, I see some smaller clouds, so I might switch brushes and do some smaller clouds back here in the back. And some of those become less intense, the far away ones. The more intense ones are super bright. When it dries, I can go back over those and add some more intensity to them. Another layer will brighten that white up. So that's second layer right there. The top edges are super bright, so a little extra, and I can go off my edges just like the picture here. Typically, to pull the viewer in, the larger clouds are at the top and the smaller ones get really small toward the horizon line. So I'll work at that, and I'll work at some layering, and I'll bring the clouds along, and then I will work on the greenery, the trees, and the foreground. Thanks for watching. All right, I finished working on the clouds for a little while. I got to a point where the shadow in the cloud, I just watered the paint down and kind of smeared the brush around to get it a little bit smoother looking. Sometimes you can even use your finger to smear. You just gotta play around and figure out different ways by experimenting, but I'm kind of close to what the clouds are with the shadows and the brightness. They don't have to be exactly the same shapes and everything, but they're close, sizes are changed, and I'm ready to move on to the middle ground and foreground.